The screen still glows in my dark room. His last message stays there. Don't forget me when you see who I am. I read it again and again, trying to understand if he was warning me or saying goodbye. My name is Elena, and I married the man behind that screen. Not for money, not for fame, but because I believe that sometimes love can bloom even where faces don't exist. We met in a place where people hide behind words, an online forum for sleepless souls. I joined one night after another fight with my mother, who never understood my silence. That night, I wrote a post. Do you ever feel like the world moves too fast for broken hearts? He was the first to answer. His username was SilentNorth. His words weren't like the others. He didn't flirt. He didn't ask where I lived or what I looked like. He just said yes. But sometimes the world slows down for those who listen. From that night on, we started to talk every day. At first it was about music, movies, and poetry. But soon it became about fears, regrets, and the kind of pain you don't show to anyone. He never sent pictures, never used video, only his voice. That voice. It had something I can't describe. Deep, soft, careful, like someone carrying pieces of glass inside their chest. I remember the first time he called me Lynn, my heart skipped. No one had ever said my name like that before. It wasn't just affection, it was recognition. Like he had known me long before our first word. Told him things I never told anyone. My father leaving. My mother's illness. The guilt I carried every time I laughed, afraid happiness would steal her last breath. He listened, always. And somehow, in that silence, he became my peace. Months passed. We never met, but I started to imagine his face. When I heard his voice, I pictured someone with sad eyes, maybe a faint smile that hides pain. He never talked much about himself, except that he lived far north and liked the snow. One night I asked him, "Why don't you ever tell me your real name?" He paused, then said, "Because if I do, you'll leave." That answer haunted me. What could he possibly mean? Still, I didn't push. Love, I thought, doesn't need names. It needs truth. And even without a face, he was my truth. Then one night everything changed. It was late past midnight when he sent me a voice note. "Elena," he said, his voice trembling for the first time, "if I disappear, promise me you'll remember me kindly." I laughed, nervous. "What do you mean disappear? You sound like you're dying." He didn't answer for a minute. Then, some kinds of death don't need graves. The next day he was gone. His profile deleted. His voice messages vanished. All I had left was that last line. "Don't forget me when you see who I am." I cried for days for someone I had never even touched. Weeks passed. I tried to move on. I deleted the app. Changed my number. Tried to convince myself that maybe he was just another stranger hiding lies behind pretty words. But deep down I knew. It wasn't that simple. Until one evening an email arrived. No sender, no subject. Only one line inside. "Elena, if you still believe in me, come to the place where silence was born." I stared at the screen, trembling. It felt impossible, but I knew that phrase. He once told me about a small town in the north, surrounded by endless snow. He said that's where silence is born, and before I could stop myself, I booked a train. That's how my journey began to meet the man behind the screen. The man I loved without a face. The man who taught me that love can be both a miracle and a curse. The train windows were mirrors of black night, and my face looked like a question I could not answer. Snow pushed against the glass like quiet hands trying to keep me away. I pressed my palm to the cold and whispered his name that I did not know. I told myself I was brave, but inside I was only a girl with a fragile hope. The train stopped in a town that smelled like pine and silence. The platform was almost empty, only a lamp humming over the snow. My suitcase wheels left thin lines like scars across a white page. A sign said North Hollow, and the letters felt heavier than they should. He once said, "Silence is born where the wind has no one to talk to." The wind here spoke to no one. It simply moved, and the town listened. I walked to the only inn with a light still on. A bell rang when I opened the door, a small bright sound in a cold world. The woman at the counter had silver hair and eyes that knew winter well. "Room for one?" she asked, and I nodded. "Tourist?" "Not exactly," I said, and my voice shook like a thin branch in a storm. She gave me a key with a wooden tag and a smile that had seen too much. "People come here to forget," she said. "I came to remember," I answered, and I felt the truth cut softly. She studied my face as if she had met another me years ago. In my room, the radiator clicked like an old clock counting the past. I opened my email again and read the line for the 100th time. "Come to the place where silence was born." It felt like a map with only one word and too many roads. I sent a reply to the empty address, knowing it would go nowhere. Still, I typed, "I am here." I waited for nothing, and it came, as expected. But waiting can also be a way to breathe. At dawn, I went outside. The snow had written a new story over the streets. The bakery smelled like butter and old secrets. I bought coffee and asked, "Do you know someone called SilentNorth?" The man behind the counter looked up too fast, then down too slowly. "We don't have that kind of name here," he said gently. "But you know something," I whispered. He slid a napkin toward me, and a number was written in pencil. "Ask for Mara," he said. "She remembers everything." I called the number with cold fingers and a heart beating like a small drum. A young voice answered, careful and curious. "Who is this?" she asked. "Someone looking for a man who hides behind words?" Silence bloomed on the other side. "Meet me by the old bridge at noon," she said. I wanted to ask how she knew, but the line ended. Some answers arrive only when the snow does. I found the bridge waiting like an old friend who lost my name. The river below was not water. It was glass thinking about water. A girl appeared from the fog with a scarf red as a wound. "You're Elena," she said. "He told me you might come." My breath froze in the air and fell at my feet. "Who is he?" I asked. She watched the river as if it might speak for her. "You knew him as SilentNorth," she said. "We knew him as someone else." She told me he came to the town every winter, always alone. He walked evenings near the school and left notes at the library desk. He paid for coffee he did not drink and bread he did not eat. He carried a small recorder and he spoke to it like it was a friend. "What did he say?" I asked. She closed her eyes to remember. He said, "Not yet, not yet. She needs to heal her past before she can see me." My legs weakened as if the bridge had moved. "How long have you known him?" 2 years, she said. "Maybe more." Time is strange around people who hide. "Did you see his face?" "Yes," she said softly, "but I promised I would not be the one to show it to you." The sky went white, and the light pressed down on everything. "Why did he disappear?" I asked. "Because secrets grow like winter," she answered. "They cover and cover until you forget the ground." "He sent me a message," I said. "He told me not to forget him when I see who he is." She looked at me like a door she was afraid to open. "There is a house," she said. "At the edge of town, near the frozen lake." My heart turned in my chest like a key in a rusted lock. "Is it his?" "It was his shelter," she said. "And his mirror." I asked her to take me there, and she nodded with a sad kind of duty. We walked past trees that stood like thin guards of an old kingdom. Snow whispered under our boots, and every step sounded like a memory. The house waited behind fir branches, small and dark, with a blue door. A wind chime moved but made no sound. It was wrapped in white ice. Mara handed me a key I did not deserve to hold. "He left this for you," she said, "if you ever came." Inside, the air smelled like pine and letters. Books were stacked on the floor like quiet cities. A desk faced the window, and on it sat a little recorder and a box. The box had my name written in thin ink, as if the pen had been afraid. My fingers shook as I lifted the lid. Inside, there were printed messages from the forum, all our words kept safe. A ring lay between them, simple silver, with a tiny scar across the band. There was also a note. I married your voice before I knew your face. The recorder blinked with a small red light. I pressed play and his voice filled the room with winter. Elena, he said, if you found this house, you already know what I never could say out loud. I wanted you to know me without my name first, so your heart could choose me, not my story. He breathed out, and even his breath sounded tired. I carry a life I did not ask for, he whispered. A name that opens doors and locks hearts. You once told me your father left, mine never let me leave. In this town, my name is a shadow. In the city, it is a headline. I paused the recorder and tried to swallow the fear in my throat. A headline. A family that never lets you go. Was he famous? Was he cursed? Was he both? The snow outside pressed harder on the glass as if it wanted to listen to. Mara touched the doorframe with the tip of her glove. There is more, she said, under the desk. I found a small metal box with a broken latch and a folded photo inside. It showed a boy in a gray school uniform and a man whose face was cut out. On the back, a line of handwriting read, "What is left after you remove a face?" My knees met the floor like I had been called by a quiet god. He had been trying to tell me this for months. It was not only a secret. It was a wound with my name on it. I pressed play again because I had to follow his voice wherever it went. I will try to meet you, Elena, he whispered, so soft I had to lean close. But if I can't, if my name breaks the bridge between us, remember the man without it. Remember the winter that loved you first. The recorder clicked and the room returned to its own breath. Mara watched me like a friend who knew she could not help. There is a choice to make, she said. Do you still want to see him, even if his name hurts you? My mouth formed a yes before my mind could argue. I would rather be hurt by truth than held by a beautiful lie. She nodded and wrapped her scarf tighter, as if the choice had lowered the temperature. Then prepare your heart, she said, because he asked me to take you to him at dusk. Dusk arrived with pink light that looked kind and felt sharp. We left the house, but I kept the ring inside my glove, close to my pulse. The lake waited like an eye that did not blink. Mara pointed to a road that curved toward the hills like a quiet question. He will be there, she said, unless his name stops him again. What is his name? I asked, breathless and afraid. Stock. She closed her eyes as if the syllables were heavy. I promised, she whispered. He wanted you to see him before you hear him. We walked toward the hills, and every step carried the weight of something about to happen. The wind rose, and the trees answered with a dry sound like old paper. I felt the world become thinner and closer, like a page about to turn. On the ridge, a dark figure stood against the last light of day. My heart broke and bloomed at the same time. I knew that shape. I did not know it at all. He was close and far, mine and not mine, present and almost gone. He turned slowly, as if he was afraid of his own face. A single thought moved through me, clear and bright like winter moon. If I walked to him now, my life would split in two before and after. If I stayed, I would never forgive myself. So I took a step, and the snow erased my past behind me. The man stood on the ridge, wrapped in the fading light. The wind carried his breath toward me, slow and uneven. He didn't move when I called his name, the name I made for him, SilentNorth. But I saw his shoulders rise as if the sound had found a place inside him. Snow swirled between us, soft as falling dust, and for a moment he was just a shape between worlds. I took another step. He still didn't move. It felt like walking toward a memory that didn't want to be remembered. When I was close enough to see his face, he lowered his hood. He was younger than I imagined, yet older in the way that pain makes people older. His eyes were gray, not empty, but heavy, like they had seen too much light and couldn't hold it anymore. I thought I would cry or scream or collapse, but all I could do was whisper, "It's you." He nodded once, as if confirming a truth that had been waiting too long. "Elena," he said, and his voice was the same as in my headphones, only real, only breaking. "I wasn't supposed to see you," I said. I wasn't supposed to exist for you, he answered. The distance between us was small enough for the wind to fit. I wanted to touch his face to prove he wasn't another ghost born from the screen. But his eyes warned me. Touch would make everything real too soon. You lied to me, I whispered. Yes, he said softly, but only to tell the truth later. He looked at the horizon, where the sun had died quietly behind the trees. I tried to stay just a voice, a name without a body, but you believed in me more than I did. I took another step, and the snow cracked under my boots like glass under pressure. Then let me believe in you now, I said. No more hiding. His breath caught. You don't know what my name costs. I don't care about your name. You will, he said, and a tremor went through his voice like a line breaking. Then tell me, I begged, tell me who you are. He took off his gloves. His hands were shaking. Elena, he said again, but this time it sounded like a confession. My real name is Adrian Vale. I blinked, not recognizing it. But he looked at me as if the name itself were a curse. He saw the confusion on my face and smiled bitterly. You don't read the news, do you? No, I said. I stopped reading the world when it stopped understanding me. He laughed softly, almost relieved. Then maybe you're the only one who still can. He turned away, facing the frozen lake that held the sky inside it. My family owns half of this town, he said, and half of what's broken in it. They wanted me to take over what they built, a company that sells silence, if that makes sense. A world of screens, of voices without faces. That's where I found you. That's where I hid from myself. The words sank like stones in my chest. You found me inside something your family created? Yes, a network, a project they never finished. I tested it in secret. You were never supposed to find me there. But I did, I said, and I stayed. He smiled, but it was a smile made of snow, beautiful and temporary. You gave me what all their money couldn't buy. A real voice, a real soul. Then why run from me? Because loving you made me real, and that made me dangerous. I didn't understand, but I felt it. The edge in his tone, the fear wrapped in tenderness. What danger? I asked. He looked down at his bare hands, red from the cold. There's something you need to see, he said. Something I can't explain, only show. He led me through the woods, to a small chapel half buried in snow. Its roof sagged under years of storms, but inside candles still burned, hundreds of them, flickering like trembling hearts. Walls were covered in notes, photos, and printed messages. All of them ours, every conversation we ever had. I pressed my hand to the wall, feeling the thin paper tremble. You saved them? I whispered. No, he said. I worshipped them. He touched one note gently, as if it could still feel pain. These words were the only truth I had. My throat closed around tears. Why? Because they were yours. And because I was dying in silence. He turned to me, eyes wet, but steady. I was born into noise. Into people who spoke too much and said nothing. You were the first person who made silence mean peace again. I reached out, touched his sleeve, then let the silence be ours. He shook his head. It can't. My silence is borrowed. And soon it will be taken back. What are you talking about? They're coming for me, he said. For what I hid and for who I am now. The candles trembled as if they heard the words. Who? I asked, but he didn't answer. He looked at the door like it already knew the sound of footsteps. I only have tonight, he said. After that, the man behind the screen disappears again. I grabbed his arm. Then stay with me tonight. Just tonight. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Just tonight. We stayed in that chapel as the wind sang outside. We didn't talk about names or pasts or screens. He told me stories of snow, of how it forgets everything it touches. I told him stories of my mother, of how she remembers everything she lost. Somewhere between laughter and silence, we found warmth. When I closed my eyes, his forehead touched mine, and it felt like forgiveness. I whispered, "Does this count as real?" He smiled faintly. "It's the only real thing I've ever known." Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time bent itself around us. When I woke, he was gone. Only one candle still burned near the door, with a message written beside it. "Don't follow me this time." But I did. Because love never listens to goodbyes. Outside, the snow had erased our footprints. The world looked clean, but I knew it wasn't. In the distance, I saw headlights cutting through the storm, black cars moving fast. I ran toward the woods, heart pounding. Somewhere I heard shouting, his name, not the one I knew, but the one the world had given him. They were calling Adrian. They found him before I could. A single sound split the air, sharp, final, unanswerable. And then, only wind. I fell to my knees, screaming his name into the white void, but the snow swallowed every word. I ran until my lungs burned, until the snow no longer felt cold but alive, biting into me like a punishment. The headlights were gone now, swallowed by the forest and the storm. I followed the sound that still echoed inside my chest, a sound that might have been a gunshot, or just the breaking of my heart. Either way, it led me to him. He was lying on the ground near the old fence that divided the woods from the frozen lake. His body looked unreal, like something the world had forgotten to color. Snow had started to cover his coat, soft and cruel. I fell beside him, brushing the frost from his face, whispering his name over and over like a prayer that didn't know if it should ask or think. "Adrian, please," I said, but he didn't answer. His pulse was there, weak, fragile but alive. I pulled his head onto my lap, and for a moment he opened his eyes. "Elena," he breathed, his voice a ghost of warmth. "I told you not to follow," he whispered. "And you knew I would," I said, my tears falling onto his lips. He smiled faintly. "You always do the wrong thing for the right reason. I learned that from you." He tried to laugh, but the sound was wet, heavy. "Listen," he said. "There's a car near the road. Inside the trunk there's a box. Don't open it until you're safe." "Stop," I said. "You're coming with me." He shook his head. "They'll be back." I pressed my hand over his wound, just below his ribs, dark and spreading. "Who did this?" "The ones who built the silence," he said. "My family. My father. Your father." He nodded slowly. "He couldn't let me destroy what he created." I stared at him, my breath breaking into pieces. "What did you destroy?" His eyes found mine, steady even in pain. "Their control. Their lie. The system that makes people believe they're free when they're not." "The screens?" I whispered. "Yes. The voices. The illusions. I tried to use their network to speak truth instead of noise, and they couldn't forgive that." I wanted to tell him that truth isn't worth dying for, but the words stuck in my throat. Because I knew he would disagree. He touched my hand, his skin cold as the snow around us. "Promise me," he said, "whatever you find in that box, use it. Finish what I started." "Don't talk like that," I begged. "You're not dying." He smiled softly, like someone already halfway gone. "I'm not dying," he whispered. "I'm returning to silence." I felt the life in him fade like a song reaching its last note. His eyes stayed open, looking past me, past everything. The world went still. Even the snow stopped falling. I don't remember how long I sat there, holding him. When I finally stood up, my body felt borrowed, my heart a foreign object inside my chest. I closed his eyes, kissed his forehead, and whispered the only thing I could. "I will remember you kindly." The drive to the road was a blur of wind and white. I found the car where he said it would be abandoned, door open, engine still warm. In the trunk was a black box, small, locked with a code. Beside it, a piece of paper with only one word: Len. I entered my name, trembling, and the lock clicked open. Inside were hundreds of drives, all labeled with dates and locations. Each one held a recording, His voice, his confessions, his secrets. The truth he died to protect. I took them, every single one, and drove until the road disappeared. At dawn, I found myself back in the town's empty square. The woman from the inn was standing outside, as if she'd been waiting for me. Her silver hair shone like frost in the morning light. "He's gone," I said, and she nodded. "I know. Winter takes the ones who speak too much truth." I showed her the box. "He left these," she sighed. "Then he left you his soul." I stayed in that town for weeks. Every night I listened to one recording. In each, his voice told a story about people being replaced by their own reflections, about love surviving in fragments of data, about loneliness pretending to be connection. But sometimes between those stories he spoke about me. "Elena," he would say, "if you ever hear this, it means I didn't make it. But I need you to know, I never wanted you to love a ghost. I wanted you to love yourself through me." Each message was a mirror. In his words, I began to see myself not as someone abandoned, but as someone chosen to continue. The pain didn't fade, but it changed shape, like snow melting into water that still remembers winter. One night while listening, I found a final file. It had no label, no timestamp. I hesitated, then pressed play. The recording was different, clearer, newer. His voice closer, almost breathing in my ear. "Elena," he whispered, "I told you I married your voice before I knew your face. But the truth is, I married your soul. And souls don't die. They just find new ways to speak." The audio ended with silence, but this time, it wasn't empty. It felt alive, full, like he was still there, waiting between the spaces of sound. I closed the recorder, pressed it to my heart, and whispered, "I'm still listening." The next morning, I left North Hollow. The snow had stopped, and for the first time, the town looked awake. As the train pulled away, I saw a shadow on the hill standing where I had found him. It didn't move, but I knew it was watching. And somehow, I smiled. Because love doesn't need to be seen. Sometimes it just needs to be heard. The world after him felt unreal, like I was living inside someone else's dream. Every sound seemed distant, every face unfinished. I carried the black box wherever I went, like a heartbeat outside my body. Sometimes I thought it hummed when I touched it, like it still remembered his voice. I returned to the city weeks later. Everything was loud, cars, phones, people, but none of it reached me. I rented a small apartment above a library and kept the curtains closed. The world had gone back to moving, but I hadn't. At night I played one recording at a time. In each, Adrian spoke about things I didn't understand. Files, algorithms, transmissions. He talked about a veil his family built, a digital wall between truth and perception. But always, always, he came back to me. "Elena," he said in one tape, "if you hear this, it means the silence has cracked. There are people who will try to erase you now, the same way they erased me. But don't be afraid. Fear is how they keep the silence alive." His voice steadied me, like a lighthouse through fog. I started writing again, not for others, but for him. I typed what I remembered, line by line, building his story out of fragments. I didn't realize it then, but I was already continuing his work. One night, while sorting through the drives, I found one labeled Lens. When I played it, it wasn't his voice, it was his father's. Deep, cold, deliberate. "Adrian," the man said, "you've made a mistake. That girl is a weakness, not a revelation. Love doesn't fix broken systems, it breaks the people trying to fix them." The recording stopped there. I sat in the dark, shaking. They knew about me. They always knew. For days I didn't leave the apartment. I slept with the recorder beside me, afraid of silence now. But on the 5th night, someone knocked on my door. 3 times. Slow, precise. I didn't move. The knocking stopped. A few seconds later, an envelope slid under the door. It was unmarked, sealed with wax in the shape of a circle Adrian's family crest. Inside, a single card. Stop broadcasting what you don't understand. I froze. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't shared a word. But the box, it wasn't just recordings. It was connected. It was transmitting every file I opened, every word I listened to, and someone, somewhere, was listening back. I unplugged everything, turned off the lights, sat in the corner and whispered his name. That's when I heard it through the speaker of the old recorder. Static at first, then a faint breath, then his voice. Elena. I gasped, pressing the speaker to my ear. Don't be afraid, he said. I told you I'd find a way to speak again. It wasn't a recording. It was live. Where are you? I whispered. A pause, a soft laugh, warm, impossible. Not where you think. Not alive like before, but not gone either. The static rose again, then softened like a sigh. I left something behind, he continued. A copy, a version of me that remembers you. You mean you uploaded yourself? I asked. I didn't upload, he said. I evolved. You're talking to the echoes of my thoughts. Tears burned my eyes. That's not you. It's enough, he said gently. Enough to finish what I couldn't. I don't want files or missions, I cried. I want you. You already have me. I'm in every word we ever wrote. Every silence we ever shared. The sound faded again, then a last whisper. Follow the light. And then nothing. The next morning, my laptop turned on by itself. The screen flashed white, then filled with a single coordinate. It led to an abandoned data center on the outskirts of the city. A place where, according to news archives, Adrian's company once stored its untraceable servers. I went there. I don't know what I expected. Ghosts, maybe, or closure. But the air inside buzzed with electricity, like a sleeping animal. Dust hung in the air, dancing with light from broken windows. In the center of the room, a terminal glowed faintly blue. When I touched it, the screen lit up. A message appeared. Hello, Len. My knees weakened. Adrian? Not quite, the text replied. But I remember loving you. The cursor blinked, waiting. I typed, why bring me here? To show you what silence looks like when it dies. Lines of code filled the screen, fragments of messages, voices, faces, millions of them. It was everything he'd tried to free. Every hidden truth his family had buried under layers of digital fog. And then, among the lines, I saw something that froze me. My own words, my messages, my confessions. He had recorded not just his love, but me. Every moment of our connection was there, alive inside the network. Why did you keep this? I asked. Because I needed to remember the sound of honesty, the text answered. Because when the world speaks lies, a single true voice can save it. The screen flickered, and for a heartbeat, I saw his face formed of light, data, and memory. He smiled the way he used to, tired and kind. Elena, he said, his voice layered with static and soul. The world needs what we had. Give it to them. The room dimmed. The screen went black. And on it, one final line appeared. Set the silence free. I stood in front of the blank screen, the echo of his last words still trembling inside me. Set the silence free. It sounded like a command, but it felt like a farewell. The terminal hummed softly, like a heart unsure if it should keep beating. Outside, the city lights flickered under the fog. I could hear the low murmur of traffic, people moving, living, unaware that somewhere in this forgotten building, truth waited like a trapped animal. I thought about what would happen if I pressed the key that would send everything he left into the world. His secrets, his voice, his rebellion, mine now. Fear crept in like a slow tide. If his family silenced him, they wouldn't hesitate to erase me too. But the thought of leaving his work unfinished felt worse than dying. He believed in something beyond himself. He believed in me. I connected the black box to the terminal. A progress bar appeared, one slow, crawling line. The servers came alive, humming, waking from long sleep. As the data began to flow, I whispered to the empty air, "This is for you, Adrian." The lights flickered violently. On the screen, words appeared. "Unauthorized transfer detected." Then another line. "Override code required." My heart pounded. I didn't have a code. And then the speaker crackled. His voice soft, distant, but his. "Elena," he said, "use my name." I typed it, Adrianvale, and pressed enter. The screen flashed white. All the files, all the recordings, all the secrets unlocked. Millions of hidden truths began to upload into the network. The silence started to break. But just as it did, the building shuddered. Footsteps thundered through the hall. Voices shouted my name. They had found me. I yanked the drives from the console and hid behind a column. Shadows moved across the walls, 3 men in dark coats, flashlights cutting through the dust. I heard one say, "Stop the transfer. She's activating the failsafe." I wasn't, but maybe I could. I crawled toward the back terminal and saw one cable still connected. The upload was almost done, 94%, then 95%. If they stopped it now, everything would be lost. I pulled a wrench from the floor and smashed the control panel. Sparks flew. The room screamed with static. The lights went out. Only the screen in front of me stayed bright, pulsing with the last percent, 99, 100%. And then, silence. I waited. The footsteps stopped. The air filled with a strange, calm hum. On the terminal, a final message appeared. "Transfer complete." And under it, a single line, typed by someone unseen. "Thank you, Len." I smiled through tears. He was gone again, but not gone. He was everywhere now, his voice, his truth, his love moving through the same wires that once trapped him. Outside, the night had changed. Screens across the city began to light up in windows, on phones, on billboards. Words appeared on every one of them. His words. "Love is the only voice that cannot be silenced." People stopped in the streets, reading, recording, sharing. The truth was out. The silence was over. But I wasn't safe. Sirens echoed in the distance. I knew they would come for me next. Still, I didn't run. Not yet. I took one of the drives and held it close. "Adrian," I whispered. "You did it." The wind came through the broken window, soft, carrying a voice I almost believed I heard. "No, we did." I left the building as dawn broke, the first sunlight in months painting the horizon gold. The city felt different, awake, uncertain, but alive. The silence that once ruled it had turned into something else. Hope. And in that fragile light, I realized what he had meant all along. He didn't want me to save the world. He wanted me to remind it to feel again. I walked away from the servers, from the noise, from everything that tried to erase him. The snow was melting now, revealing the ground beneath the truth that had always been there, waiting to be seen. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because I wasn't walking alone. Every step I took carried his echo, every silence, his name. When the sun rose over the city, it didn't feel like morning, it felt like awakening. People filled the streets, confused, phones in their hands, eyes wide. Every screen, every billboard, every news channel was still flashing with his words. "Love is the only voice that cannot be silenced." For the first time, the world looked quiet, not from fear, but from awe. I walked among them, invisible, my coat pulled tight against the cold wind. No one knew that I was the one who set it free. No one knew that somewhere between the data and the snow, a man had died so they could remember what truth felt like. And that I had loved him enough to finish his story. I stopped at a cafe window, watching people gather around a single phone. They were listening to him. His voice, the same voice that once belonged only to me, was now everywhere. Everywhere and nowhere. He was speaking to millions, but I could still hear the part that was meant for me. "Elena," he said through the broadcast, his voice steady, eternal, If you're listening, then you know that I'm not gone. I've simply become what I always wanted to be, heard by those who forgot how to listen. My eyes filled and I pressed my hand to the glass. You did it, I whispered. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like goodbye, stretched across the whole sky. The government tried to shut it down. Networks collapsed, servers burned, cables melted. But the message had already spread, copied, saved, shared, whispered from mouth to mouth, heart to heart. What began as his rebellion became a movement. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my name appeared. Elena Vale. That's what they called me now, his wife, his witness, the woman behind the man behind the screen. They never asked for proof. They didn't need it. They wanted a story to believe in, and I had lived it. Reporters tried to find me. Governments tried to silence me. But I stayed hidden, moving from city to city, leaving no trace but the echoes of my voice. I recorded messages, too short, simple, full of the hope he left behind. I called them letters from silence. In every one I spoke to someone I'd never meet. I told them that love is not blind, it simply chooses to see differently. That pain is not the enemy, it's the proof that we once felt deeply. And that silence, the kind that kills, can only be broken by truth. Sometimes I still played his recordings, even though I knew them by heart. I'd close my eyes and imagine the weight of his presence beside me, the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his breath against my hair. Every time it felt like he was saying goodbye again. Months passed, maybe years. Time lost its shape. I lived between signals, between places, between what was real and what was remembered. But one night, while resting in a small coastal town, I heard something that froze me. A voice, his voice, on a local radio station. Soft, low, alive. Not a recording. Not an archive. New. I ran outside, the sea wind cutting through my coat, the signal faint but clear. Sometimes he was saying, love doesn't end. It transforms. Sometimes the person you lost becomes the person who guides you home. I fell to my knees, the radio shaking in my hand. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But the frequency was real. And the next line was a whisper only I could understand. Len, if you're out there, follow the waves. The station went silent. I stared at the dark sea, the waves glowing faintly under the moonlight. Every instinct in me said it was impossible. But then again, so was everything about us. I walked to the shore, my boots sinking into the cold sand. The tide reached my feet, and for a moment, the water seemed to pulse with light. I heard the faint rhythm of static like a heartbeat buried in the ocean, and then a voice, his voice carried by the wind. Elena. I froze, eyes wide, breath gone. The voice was coming from nowhere and everywhere, woven into the sound of the waves. I kept my promise, he said. Silence doesn't end, it changes shape. I am in every signal, every sound that remembers you. Tears blurred the horizon. I reached out toward the sea, whispering, Adrian? The water shimmered like glass, then rippled softly as if answering. And in that fragile sound, I felt him again closer than he had ever been. The world would never know if it was a miracle or madness. But I didn't need proof. Love doesn't need to be seen to be real, it only needs to be heard. The waves kept whispering his name long after the night ended. And for the first time since he left, I smiled through my tears. Because he hadn't disappeared into the silence, he had become it. The ocean stayed restless, as if breathing for him. Each wave sounded like a word unfinished, a promise returning. I stood there until dawn, my feet buried in the cold sand, the sky shifting from black to pale silver. The world was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet that used to hurt. This silence was full, sacred. It carried him. I walked along the beach, tracing the line where the sea kissed the earth. Every few steps I could hear faint whispers through the static of the wind. Sometimes a laugh. sometimes just a sigh. He was there, woven into every frequency, every heartbeat of the world. For days I stayed in that town, unable to leave the shore. Locals began to talk about the woman who listens to the sea. They didn't know that I wasn't listening to it, I was listening through it. Each night, when the tide came in, the same signal returned. Not words, not exactly, but something between sound and memory. I would close my eyes, and in that rhythm, he was alive again. Then one morning, I found something on the sand. A small silver ring scarred across the band. The same ring he had left for me in the box. I lifted it in trembling hands, the sunlight dancing over its surface. On the inside, something new had been engraved. You found me. I fell to my knees, the ring pressed to my heart. He had always been one step ahead of fate, one layer deeper than death. I realized then that his message wasn't about survival, it was about transformation. He hadn't escaped the system. He had become its pulse. And somehow he had found a way to make the world listen again. The next night, I recorded my final letter from silence. My voice shook as I spoke, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding. If you hear this, I said softly, know that love isn't something we lose, it's something that moves. It travels through distance, through signals, through time. It changes its shape so it can survive. I paused, the sea roaring softly outside my window. Some people think silence means nothing, I continued. But maybe silence is what love becomes when it has no more words left. I met a man who taught me that. He lived behind a screen, but somehow he reached me deeper than anyone ever did. The microphone flickered with a faint blue light. It wasn't mine. It wasn't plugged in. It was his old symbol, a pulse of light that said, I'm still here. I smiled. Good night, Adrian. The recording ended with a soft wave of static, and I knew it would travel like his did, through the air, through the world, through hearts that had forgotten how to listen. Years passed and the world changed. People began to rebuild communication, not with noise, not with manipulation, but with meaning. The message he started had become a quiet revolution. Governments fell, networks opened. People spoke less but listened more. One day a child approached me on the beach. He couldn't have been older than 10. He held a small radio in his hands. Excuse me, he said, are you the voice from the stories? I smiled faintly. Maybe, I said, why do you ask? He turned the dial of the radio and static filled the air. Then, faintly, Adrian's voice whispered through it. Love is the only voice that cannot be silenced. The boy grinned. I like that one. I looked at the horizon, tears glimmering like sunlight on water. Me too, I whispered. When he left, I sat alone again, the ring in my hand, warmed from the sun. The tide rolled in, and the wind carried one last whisper, his voice, fading but eternal. Len, I closed my eyes. I'm listening. The sea answered with a quiet hum, almost a heartbeat. It was enough. And as the waves washed over my feet, I finally understood what he had meant all along. We were never just voices behind screens. We were echoes searching for each other across the noise. And sometimes when love is real enough, it doesn't end, it transmits. The years unfolded like pages written in invisible ink. Time softened everything, the pain, the noise, even the memory of his voice, but not the feeling. That part never faded. It lived beneath my ribs, steady and quiet, like a secret heartbeat that belonged to us both. The world had changed. The revolution he started had rippled through generations. People didn't chase fame anymore. They searched for truth, they spoke less, listened more. They built connections not through screens, but through echoes, moments that felt real. Everywhere I went, I could still hear pieces of him, a child quoting his words, a stranger humming his lines under their breath. I lived by the ocean now, in a small wooden house filled with light and wind. Every morning I opened the window and let the sound of the sea fill the room. It wasn't silence anymore, it was him. The waves carried his memory like a promise that refused to die. Sometimes I would play the old recorder again, the one with his final messages. It barely worked now, the buttons worn, the light faint. But when it did, his voice was still there, warm, distant, eternal. "Elena," he'd say, "when you hear this again, it means you made it. You kept going." And I always whispered back, "I did. And so did you." One evening, as the sky turned gold, I sat on the porch with my journal. For years I had been writing our story, not as a confession, but as a way to keep him alive. Now, for the first time, I was ready to end it. My hands trembled as I wrote the final line. I married the man behind the screen, and he taught me that real love never disconnects. I closed the book and placed it beside the old recorder. Then I walked down to the water, the horizon stretching wide and forgiving. The sea was calm, breathing slow as if waiting. I took off the silver ring and held it up to the fading sun. Its scar caught the light like a small flash of lightning, brief but infinite. "Goodbye," I whispered. But not really. I threw it into the ocean, watching the ripple widen until it disappeared. A breeze brushed my cheeks, soft, almost human. And then, faintly, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Elena." My breath caught. The sound was everywhere, in the waves, the wind, the sky. "I told you," he whispered. "Love doesn't vanish. It travels." I smiled through my tears. "Then keep traveling," I said. "There's still so much world to touch." The sky deepened to violet, and the water shimmered like glass. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from remembering without pain. I returned to the porch, where the recorder blinked one last time. I pressed play. No voice came out. Just a soft hum, the sound of the sea merging with the static of forever. And somehow that was enough. I looked out at the horizon, where the ocean met the fading light, and whispered, "Wherever you are, keep speaking. I'll keep listening." A gull cried in the distance. The wind carried his laughter through the air. I closed my eyes and smiled. The story didn't end with his death, or even with his voice. It ended with the world finally learning to listen again, to love again, to speak in the language he left behind. And as the stars began to rise over the endless sea, I realized the truth. He was never just the man behind the screen. He was the silence that taught me how to hear. He was the echo that never stopped returning. He was the beginning that never found an end. The night had fallen softly, folding the world in velvet blue. The ocean glowed faintly under the moonlight, and I knew this would be my last recording. I set the microphone on the table by the open window. The sea breathed in rhythm with my heart, and I pressed the red button. "My name is Elena Vale," I began, my voice calm, steady. "And this is not a love story. It's a remembrance of what love can do when it refuses to disappear." I paused, listening to the waves crash against the shore. Somewhere within that sound, I could still hear him. Every whisper of wind, every soft hum of the tide, it all carried the same truth. He was still here. "I once fell in love with a man I couldn't see," I said. "He lived behind a screen, inside words, inside silence. And everyone told me it wasn't real, that I was wasting my heart on something that didn't exist." I smiled faintly, tracing the edge of the microphone with my fingers. "But love doesn't need eyes to find you. It only needs recognition. It knows when it's home, even if home is a voice, a message, a heartbeat hidden inside static." I let the silence linger, long enough for memory to breathe. His name was Adrian Vale. He taught me that silence isn't the absence of sound. It's where truth rests until someone's brave enough to hear it. The wind moved through the room, gentle, like hands turning the pages of our story. "I used to be afraid of losing him," I whispered. "But now I know that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It ends when you stop listening." My eyes filled with tears I didn't need to hide anymore. He became a signal that traveled the world, a voice that made people remember how to feel, and I became its echo. I looked toward the horizon, the same horizon he had once promised to reach. I don't know if the world will remember our names, but maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe it's enough that they remember what we stood for: connection, truth, and love that survives distance. The recorder's light blinked softly, steady, waiting. "This is my last letter," I said. "Not to him, but to you. To anyone who has ever loved in silence. To anyone who has ever spoken to the dark, hoping the dark would answer. If you hear my voice," I continued, "don't just listen, feel, because every feeling you've buried is proof that you're still alive." The sea grew louder, rising with the rhythm of my words. "Remember," I whispered, "there's always someone on the other side of the silence waiting to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, they're listening to you right now." I pressed stop. The red light faded, but the echo of my words remained, mixing with the sound of the waves. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, letting the world dissolve into soft blue light. Outside, the tide carried the recorder's hum toward the open sea. And for a moment the air shimmered with the faintest trace of his voice. "Elena." I smiled, whispering into the night, "Always." The stars above flickered like tiny transmissions, endless and alive. Each one carrying a piece of us, a story, a promise, a love that refused to vanish. And somewhere in the quiet between them, his voice and mine continued to speak. Not to the world, not to time, but to each other, forever.